Thank you to everyone for attending this webinar, Exploring Enhancements in Fieldprint Platform 4.2. I'm Paul Hishma, Vice President of Science and Technology at Field to Market. Before we get started, some logistics. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website. Attendees are muted and videos turned off, and we ask that you enter your questions in the Q&A box on your screen. Our webinar today will cover an introduction to pulses and a corporate perspective on pulse sustainability, a deep dive into Environmental Defense Fund's nitrogen balance model, and an overview of how these two enhancements, as well as others, have been incorporated in the platform. Before I introduce our speakers, let's take a quick look at how these two enhancements fit in the larger picture. First, with the addition of pulse crops, our 8 sustainability metrics can be generated on a total of 12 commodity crops or feed pathways. Note that pulse crops includes chickpeas, dry beans, dry peas, fava beans, lentils, and lupin. Second, version 4.2 incorporates the nitrogen balance model as an additional supplementary tool, similar to how we've incorporated SciPlatform's farm sustainability assessment, as well as USDA's Comet Planner tool. These enhancements were added as part of our yearly science release in July of this year. Now our speakers. To discuss pulses, we have Tami Stubbs, Director of Growth and Sustainability with U.S. Dry Pea and Lentil Council, and Robert Loggins, Director of External Affairs and Community Engagement with Bush Brothers and Company. Afterwards, we'll learn about the nitrogen balance model, and for that, we'll hear from Simone Schenkel, Manager, Resilient Food and Forests, and Alison Eagle, Senior Scientist, Climate Smart Agriculture, both with Environmental Defense Fund. So at this time, let me turn things over to Tami to get us started.
All right, thank you, Paul. I'll just share my screen here. Okay, again, my name is Tami Stubbs. I'm Director of Growth and Sustainability at the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council. And I'd like to thank the Field to Market staff for inviting me to talk to you today about USA Pulses. Our USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council office is headquartered in the Palouse region of the Pacific Northwest in Moscow, Idaho. Our office happens to be situated directly on the state lines of Idaho and Washington. To get started, I'd like to play a short video for you.
We place a little seedling in the ground and Mother Nature takes over from there. With the rain that Mother Nature brings us, that little seedling grows and grows and grows, and in the end, we get to go harvest, and then that harvest gets shipped to someplace like Bangladesh or somewhere in Central America and ends up on somebody's dinner plate. That's absolutely awesome.
At its base, I think farming and feeding people is a noble profession. I certainly take pride in thinking that I'm part of feeding the world.
We're responsible for the food supply. There isn't 10 years worth of food and storage. It's up to us to grow a crop every year to feed everyone.
There's only so much land in the world. It is what it is. We have what we have. And if we don't take care of our land, the food sustainability will go lower and lower.
What's the definition of sustainability? Leaving something better than when you found it, whether that be the soil or the food system or the community.
And so if you're not familiar with pulses, pulses are members of the legume plant family. And you see some examples here at the top, like soybeans, peanuts, fresh peas and beans. How pulses differ from other legumes is that they're defined as the dry edible seed or fruit of the leguminous plant. Pulses are annual crops where the seeds grow in pods. And as you saw at the end of the video, our organization works primarily with dry peas, lentils, chickpeas, and dry beans, along with emerging pulse crops like fava bean and lupin. USA Pulses is a coalition of organizations representing the growers, warehouses, sellers, processors of pulse crops. Underneath the umbrella of the USA Pulses organization is the national organizations, the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council and the American Pulse Association, as well as the US Pea and Lentil Trade Association. We have the Northern Pulse Growers Association that represents the growers of North Dakota and Montana, as well as the Western Pulse Growers Association that represents the growers of Washington and Idaho. And then we have all the state checkoff organizations in Montana, North Dakota, Idaho, Washington, South Dakota, Nebraska, as well as the California Bean Board. And then our coalition also includes a nonprofit organization, the Pulse Foundation, with the mission to foster human health and nutrition and improve food security and sustainability, both nationally and globally. There are four main functions of our organization. We have the research department, domestic and international marketing, and then our information and government affairs department that ensures the adoption of policy that protects the U.S. pulse industry. And our sustainability initiatives will touch each of these pillars. We'll be working to benchmark the sustainable agricultural practices that our growers have already implemented, working to identify the areas that are needed for improvement, and then educating consumers on the environmental benefits of pulse production and consumption as part of a sustainably produced diet. The map you see here shows the pulse crop producing counties of the United States and the total acreage. So the darker the purple color, the more pulse acres in that county. In 2023, there were over 3 million acres of pulses planted, with production of more than 2.5 million metric tons. In round numbers, that works out to about 38% dry beans, 32% peas, 17% lentils, and 13% chickpeas. Most of the USA pulses are exported. When you average over the last 3 years, about 62% of the total production was exported. And the major destinations for USA pulses are Europe, India, Latin America, and China. And then pulses are also exported as food aid, with the major destinations being African countries. Pulses are nutritional powerhouses. Currently, the dietary guidelines for Americans recommends the consumption of 1.5 cups of pulses per week. And we hope to see this amount increase to 3 cups per week when the 2025-2030 guidelines are released soon. Pulses are good sources of protein. They're excellent sources of fiber, high in antioxidants, high in iron, potassium, folate, as well as being gluten, sodium, and cholesterol-free, and having a low glycemic index. So when we think about how pulses are nutritious, for all the reasons I just mentioned, they're affordable. Dry peas, beans, lentils, and chickpeas are more affordable than many other sources of protein for consumers. They're sustainable because they're shelf-stable and help to reduce food waste. And they're also versatile. And so we think that Americans should be eating a lot more pulses. And one of the greatest things about pulses, as I said, are their versatility. Pulses can be found in almost any category of food or beverage. On this slide, I show a lot of convenient foods, but pulses can be consumed whole in really a limitless array of colorful, nutritious recipes. And the food categories that are showing the largest growth for pulse consumption are as snacks and also as high quality ingredients for other foods. Another area of growth for pulse crops is as pet food and for feed. And it's worth noting that pulse byproducts are used in the feed, in producing the animal feeds. And this is contributing to the sustainability of pulses by reducing the waste that's generated in the processing. Including pulses in a crop rotation can lead to a lower carbon footprint in the cropping system because of their ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen and reduce the need for synthetic fertilizer applications. So as members of the legume family, pulses have this automatic head start on their path to sustainability. Not only are pulses reducing the need for nitrogen by creating their own food source, they're also increasing the nitrogen use fixation over the entire cropping system, and they leave nitrogen behind for subsequent crops. An example of this is lentils. Lentils can leave up to 45 pounds of acres behind for the subsequent crop. Including pulses in crop rotations is one way to increase the soil microbial diversity in the rotation, and pulses have been shown to increase the yield of subsequent crops. In many of our pulse growing areas, pulses have replaced fallow in the crop rotation, and by reducing fallow in the rotation, the likelihood of soil erosion by wind and water is reduced. And also, we've seen that declines in soil organic matter can be stopped or even reversed. Pulses are water efficient. They require less water to produce than many other crops, and they're better able to withstand drought. They're relatively shallow rooted, and they use less water in the soil profile. And so that means that there can even be some residual moisture left over to help establish and produce the next crop. They also help to protect water quality, because less inorganic fertilizer required means less possibility of fertilizer leaching or running off to contaminate water supplies. Pulse crops consume less energy than some other crops because, again, of that need, the less need for synthetic fertilizer. And when farmed using conservation tillage or no-till, fuel consumption is reduced because of fewer trips over the fields with farm equipment. And again, because they're harvested dry, the energy required for storage is reduced, and their shelf stability helps to reduce food waste. The EPA has estimated that up to 30 to 40% of our food supply is wasted, and pulses can help be part of the solution to that problem. And no discussion on sustainability is really complete without considering the financial stability of the farming operation. Pulses increase the diversity of crop rotations and contribute to farm financial stability. In states and counties where it's available, producers have the option of crop revenue insurance for pulses to help manage farm risk. And where pulses have replaced fallow, it adds a different source of income for farmers. Pulses have also been shown to increase overall farm profitability. And so I'm just showing you these 5 measures of sustainability. These 5 are all interconnected, and this list could be much longer for pulses. But what we know is that pulses in crop rotations can increase the resilience of farming operations. And with more and more interest in how our food choices are affecting greenhouse gas emissions, pulses can be part of a sustainable solution toward reducing environmental impacts attributed to food production. And this concludes my presentation for today. My contact information is here on the screen. And again, I'd like to thank Field to Market for inviting me to talk to you today about pulses.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tami. I'll hand things over to Robert.
Okay. Get shared up. So my name is Robert Loggins. I'm the Director of External Affairs and Community Engagement for Bush Brothers, or Bush's Beans as we're known as. And it's an honor and privilege to give a perspective at the other end of the value chains. Tami's done an amazing job of representing partnership that we work with the USA Pulses folks, as we are a large North American canned bean manufacturer that is looking to really contribute to this grand vision of pulse crop expansion. We believe in pulses. We believe in the benefit that it can have across the value chain. And I think that's best expressed in this slide. This is from the wisdom of Charles Handy, an Irish philosopher that is instrumental in a lot of our cultural and also how we come to market from a business standpoint. Handy said a company ought to be a community that you belong to, like a village. Nobody owns a village. You are a member and you have rights. Shareholders will become financiers, and they will get rewarded according to the risks they assume. but they're not to be called owners. And workers won't be workers, they'll be citizens. And they will have rights, and those rights will include a share in the profits that they've created. And when I think about the video that Tami started with, and the folks that are in the farms and in the fields and working together, very much like us, a sixth generation, privately owned, family owned business, who is buying from family owned businesses and who's feeding families as well. Nobody owns the value chain, even though Bush Brothers has a face toward the consumer. We have to work together. And it really is with this kind of village approach that we think about our role in contributing to the expansion of affordable, nutritious, sustainable, vegetable-based protein, fiber, all of the amazing benefits that you heard in the previous presentation. But we truly do think it takes a village to bring that to life. And it's exciting to be a part of this conversation, to see the evolution of agriculture and the progress that is made where less people can make more food for more people. But also it takes brands like us to have a responsibility to deliver different products and different form factors and packages. And so we're excited to play our part, in the evolution of the opportunity to serve consumers, specifically on the technology in the upstream value chain. And we're trying to play our part as well. We believe that pulse crops can play a vital role in sustainability. Think about a triple bottom line, the environments that we live at, soil quality, water, land usage, our communities. The first form of community is the home. And think about the importance of dinner time. We have a saying at Bush Brothers that we refer to ourselves as a community of companions. I really love that phrase. Companion is Latin. It comes from the Latin, co and panis. It means to break bread together. And I think about this call and some of the things that we are talking about as a larger global community, a US community, of how do we make sure to do what I'm trying to do for my 3 kids at home, and that's leave the world in a little bit of a better place and teach them along the way the importance of stewardship. Economies. Tami did a wonderful job talking about the economic impacts that pulse crops can have, not only for the regions that they're grown in, but also for the individuals that grow them. As a sixth generation privately held family owned business that has no intention to sell out to private equity. Not that's a bad thing, but we really hold true to the idea that family enterprises are really important, and we're proud to buy crops from those folks, and we want to nurture that. So from the farms and fields that they're grown on to the tables and plates of the families that rely on them for nourishment, we believe pulse crops and beans, peas, lentils all have a very important place in our economy. So when I think about internally coming into this, how do you operationalize this type of vision? And these aren't the only stops kind of in the value chain, but how do we better integrate and connect our research value chain to deliver products and solutions that benefit the entire value chain? So when I think as a marketer, I started my career off with, hi there, Jay Bush and Duke here to talk to you about Bush's Secret Farming Recipe. And a lot of our research was consumer insight driven. What form factor, what product form, what messaging, what TV commercials. But it's very clear to me as I got into the innovation space and I got into external affairs, a lot of our opportunities to go back into the value chain and to listen to Tami and listen to the USA Pulses community, listen to the US Dry Bean Council, listen to the farmers in the fields that are working. What problems are they dealing with? What do cover crops fit into this? What does regenerative agriculture fit into this? Is organic still, in? What do consumers want? Is it high yield? There's a lot of questions that come, in this space. And then how do we articulate the proposition and make consumers aware as we break that line of sensory, making food that tastes great? How do we make sure that it still solves some of the larger issues that ail people? The low fiber use, metabolic impact that we see in the United States, the high glycemic impact on some foods that we have. Pulses can play a unique role, not only in our lives, but also in our pets' lives as well. And Bush Brothers is trying to figure out how do we do our part as a consumer-facing brand and create a wake of opportunities for others in the value chain. Michigan State University, good research there, Colorado State. So as we think broadly across the science and technology value chain, and then also into the marketing space, working with our customers, which is who we sell our products to, Walmart, Kroger, Home Depot, or not Home Depot, thinking about a project at home, Costco, but also to our consumers as well. And then additionally, this slide is not meant to be all inclusive, but when I think about crops and innovation and sensory and consumer awareness and consumer usage, how do we develop a level of granularity as an organization that enables us to take the wonderful products that have been created by amazing people that have phenomenal properties? And one of the greatest challenges that I see with pulses is they can come in refrigerated form, they can be shelf stable, they can be frozen. They can come in different form factors like butters, dips, spreads, whole beans, dry beans, and pulses. And they can come in different packaging configurations. We're primarily in cans, but we've got a couple things in pouches. So how do you take this wonderful application of a food source that has the ability through a diversity of different expressions to meet the needs of consumers across the United States and also the world? But we also have to have profit to do that as well. So when I think about the importance of everybody contributing to do their part in the village to deliver solutions, the human sustainability piece of it, as we tell this integrated marketing story to make sure that we climb the ranks of specialty crops. And I believe we can compete one day with corn, with soy, with wheat. I think the properties that pulses have are just too good to be true. And as Tami mentioned before, we work with the USA Pulse group, and the Coalition for the Advancement of Pulses is and you can read on the slide, matches research, applications from sustainability to crop health to soil health, all the way to the dietary guidelines, and making sure that we have an opportunity as an industry together to leverage the power of the government, to leverage the power of our communities, and to leverage the power of business as well. Because I truly believe that if we work together as villagers in a grand global community and each do our part from a citizenship standpoint, that we'll have an opportunity to have what I believe is a business to business relationship where we're business to consumer, and then ultimately take the consumer insights and bring them back and create a virtuous cycle where we all pull our part, we all take our fair share of the risk, but we also have an opportunity to share in the reward that we can generate for not only ourselves and our companies, but for our communities and hopefully for the world as well. So thank you, everybody. Buy bushes. Make sure you have chili as it gets cold. And thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Robert. And thank you, Tami. We'll now switch gears and learn a little bit, or a lot, hopefully, about EDF's nitrogen balance model. Hand it over to Alison and Simone.
Okay. All right. And there we go. Does that look okay, Paul?
I'll allow others on the staff to confirm. I can't see it from my screen at the moment.
Okay. Well, thanks so much to Tami and Robert for kicking us off and talking about the great world of pulses. And thanks to Field to Market for taking the time to showcase some of this work. So today I'm going to talk to you all about EDF's End Balance Framework, which is a tool for corporate climate ambition on nitrous oxide. So first I want to talk about the opportunity. Right now, much of the focus in mitigation from agricultural emissions is on carbon dioxide. CO2 at the field level is hard and expensive to measure, and it can be reversible if land is tilled or soil is disturbed to certain degrees. We believe that N2O presents a low-hanging fruit opportunity for the food and agriculture sector to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. N2O emissions reductions are permanent. Nitrogen management improves on-farm and supply chain resiliency, and N2O reductions are low risk to yield when executed correctly. So nitrous oxide is crop production's greenhouse gas nemesis. The high global warming potential for N2O means that 1 ton of N2O causes actually a lot more climate damage than 1 ton of CO2. So even though the total quantity in tons of CO2 is much, much greater than that of N2O, we cannot ignore this small but mighty greenhouse gas. When you consider the impact of N2O in CO2 equivalents, it makes up 6% of all global emissions and 7% in the US alone. Most N2O comes from agriculture. And in fact, N2O accounts for about 1/4 of all of the climate impact from agricultural emissions. The other challenge is that as we produce more food to feed the 8 billion people we now have on the planet, N2O emissions continue to grow as well. In the US, overall greenhouse gas emissions increased by over 3.7% over the past 30 years, but nitrous oxide emissions from ag soils increased by 7.1%. Globally, human-induced N2O emissions have increased by 40% over the past 40 years, with the most increases in direct emissions from nitrogen additions to agriculture. So given this low-hanging fruit opportunity, supply chain companies more and more are looking to reduce their N2O emissions, but the existing quantification approaches don't work very well in application. What the industry really needs is a robust, meaningful, simple, scalable, credible N2O metric. So enter N-balance, which uses the simple concept of mass balance. So first we consider N being added to the field in the form of fertilizer, manure, and legumes. The remainder, or the balance, is the N-balance score. This is the N that remains on the field that has not been utilized by the crop, and it is vulnerable to loss. This loss can be as nitrous oxide emissions, or as leaching, runoff, or other environmental and health implications. We've needed an approach that delivers something scientifically robust that can account for what's happening in the field currently, but also simple enough for farmers to use and to implement at scale. We've hosted workshops, conducted meta-analysis, collaborated with other researchers, and piloted the application to confirm that indeed N-balance is the best metric and to develop it into something that is to be used. So we in the scientific community are now confident we've taken a big step forward toward being able to measure environmental progress on nitrogen, one that's actually grounded in the reality of farming, that enables farmers to measure their progress with the data that they actually already have. We've been working with Field to Market for nearly a decade, and I found that there's really an important role for N-balance for companies to reduce their agricultural emissions. And it is now even easier to use given that it is integrated with the Fieldprint platform. This methodology requires little field level data, allows farmers to define management alternatives that include not just a rate adjustment, but also changes in method, timing, and source, and allows for comparison of fields and for tracking of improvements over time. With that, I will pass it on to my colleague, Alison to discuss the nitty-gritty of N-balance.
Thank you, Simone. In the real world, on real farms, nitrogen management and the resulting productivity can vary a lot. On this slide, we see data from about 300 grain corn fields that were enrolled in the Farmers Business Network RAF program in 2022. Each dot represents one field in that year in 2022. Along the x-axis, we see the total nitrogen applied that ranges from less than 150 to up to 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre. On the y-axis, along the going up, we see corn yield that has also a significant range. The colors of the dots are related to the resulting nitrogen balance, the amount of nitrogen that's left over that wasn't removed, that was applied to the field but wasn't removed by the crop. So we see very high nitrogen balances from around 150 to quite low ones. And so obviously there's some room for improvement, either to maintain the same yield and reduce the total amount of nitrogen applied, or to improve yield while at the same total nitrogen application. And how do we get the information that's needed for growers to be able to compare their fields between and within farms? This is where we need to start with step one, collecting nitrogen balance data. It's necessary in order to be able to calculate nitrogen balance, we need to have information about that field, which includes the crop type and the field area, how much fertilizer was put on, including manure, as well as nitrogen inputs from legumes, and then the nitrogen that's removed, that's generally in grain for corn and wheat and things like, and other crops like that, but also any other parts of the plant that were removed or as harvested. In order to be able to then inform nitrogen balance and allow for continuous improvement, it's also of value to have information on other types of management practices for nitrogen, as well as tillage, planting dates, pest management, so that we can see the different types of activities that actually affect nitrogen balance. To bolster the greenhouse gas and water quality claims, this information is also of value so that we can see that changes in nitrogen balance are due to changes that people made in their management, and a project or a program can then say, we made these changes and this resulted in improvements in nitrogen balance, and thus, as we will show you in a moment, changes in the risks of losses for nitrogen. And one note would be that data must be collected at the field level in order to be the most useful. Here we'll give some examples for step 2 to calculate and analyze the field level nitrogen balance scores. We've got Farmer Charlie, who has applied 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre and then removed a certain number of pounds of nitrogen per acre in their corn grain, and the nitrogen balance score ends up being 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Farmer Morgan, on the other hand, applied more nitrogen per acre and had the similar yield, so they also removed 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre, with a resulting nitrogen balance score of 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre, which means that Farmer Morgan has a higher risk of losses of nitrous oxide, as well as other forms of nitrogen losses that can be problematic, including nitrate and ammonia losses. So using these scores, we can then go on to step 3 and apply the environmental model. This is from work that we did in collaboration with academics at universities as well as other places. And we pulled data together from corn grain and many other crops from both the US and Canada, as well as other parts of the world, in order to be able to create this generalized relationship of nitrogen balance on the x-axis to nitrous oxide emissions. As you can see, as nitrogen balance increases, our nitrous oxide emissions on average will also increase, and the slope changes so that it becomes steeper as we move up in nitrogen balance. This means that if we have a change in reduced nitrogen balance and we start off at a high point, say at 200, and we reduce by 10 pounds per acre, we end up with a greater impact on nitrous oxide emission reductions than if we started at, say, 25 and reduced by 10 pounds per acre. For this, this model, we also have established a safe zone that has been, that helps us to say this is where we would like to be in terms of nitrogen balance for a field, in order to make sure that there's enough nitrogen going onto the field to maintain the soil organic matter and keep it from mining the soil of its nutrients. And so that's where it's staying at about 25 or above. But then then the safe zone, the top of the safe zone is that set up to mitigate losses and to avoid excess losses. So keeping a nitrogen balance for a field within 25 to 75 pounds of nitrogen per acre is one way to also have this balance, this safe zone that is that shows where we want to be in order to keep a good balance. But as you could see from that previous graph, we have a wide range in nitrogen balances on real farms and real fields. We also have a very similar graph for nitrate. As you can see, this one's nitrous oxide. We have a very similar graph for nitrate that also shows a similar relationship where as we increase in nitrogen balance, we increase the risk of nitrate losses in leaching below the root zone. Then we go into step 4, where nitrogen balance then can allow a project, a grain buying company, or even a farm with multiple fields to demonstrate quantitative stewardship improvement. We know that moving from high nitrogen balances in a field or on a farm, or even within a whole watershed, will reduce the risk of nitrogen losses to nitrous oxide. Using that published relationship we just saw in the graph, we can actually calculate the reduction in nitrous oxide emissions as a result of our improved nitrogen management. So because nitrous oxide losses can vary a lot from field to field and from year to year, you need to aggregate a few hundred fields together in order to have enough confidence. So we have multiple farms showing in this graph. And we also want to use a multi-year average to be able to smooth out some of the differences that can occur year to year due to weather and other things that can cause differences in crop yield. And we do see patterns in like a certain field often ends up being, will end up looking similar to itself, more similar to itself than to others. So we see that there is an impact in management and a potential for improvement. I'll pass it back to Simone.
Thanks, Alison. So now that we've walked through end balance and the steps to getting there, we've mentioned that it's a scientifically robust framework for measuring and reporting progress towards greenhouse gas emissions from N2O and nitrate leaching. And every effort has been made to create an efficient yet credible pathway to making environmental outcome claims. So we wanted to review with you all some of the downstream claims that can be supported by end balance. So there are 3 types of claims accessible to food and ag companies who engage their farmers producers in end balance. The first is participation claims, the second is measurement claims, and the last one is environmental impact claims. First, let's talk about participation claims. These can be made at the initiation of a program and updated each year and can provide a helpful storytelling and data points, and can include examples such as, we are working with growers in this watershed to do X. Another set of more concrete examples might be the number of growers and or acres engaged, or the number of growers and or acres currently using conservation practices and or adopting new practices as a result of program participation. We also have the opportunity to share measurement claims, which involves something like, we have achieved Y improvements in greenhouse gases over 5 years. One example might include percent of acres where end balance scores are below, within, and above the end balance safe zone, or annual tons of nitrous oxide emissions. Finally, there are environmental impact claims. These require at least 4 years of end balance data, which involves a 3-year average baseline, as Alison described, and 1 year of post-intervention data, with additional years obviously strongly recommended. Some examples of these would include quantification of change, plus or minus, in N2O emissions and nitrate losses compared to the 3-year average baseline values for a single year, or the cumulative change, up or down, in nitrous oxide emissions and nitrate losses compared to the 3-year average baselines over the course of multiple years. So with that, throughout this talk, we've shared why end balance is a scientifically robust, easy to implement way of measuring progress, improving water quality, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And with integration into the Fieldprint platform, field to market members can leverage end balance to invest their supply chains to achieve Scope 3 emissions goals related to nitrous oxide and nitrate leaching reductions, and help support farmers who are actively working towards nutrient management. We've shown you that the methodology requires little field level data, that it allows farmers to define management alternatives that include not just a rate adjustment, but also changes in method, timing, and source. And it allows for comparison of fields and for tracking of improvements over time. We hope you'll test out the new integration on the calculator and reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Simone. And thank you, Alison. That was really helpful. Switch back to my slides here for a second. Yeah, thank you to our full set of speakers, both on pulses and on end balance. Just want to take a brief look at how some of these enhancements or additions look within the Fieldprint platform. So a few screenshots here to walk through. And just wanted to share how a farmer would see these and also how a project administrator would see them. First, with pulse crops added, as you see in the screen capture, a farmer who's added a field and adding a new season or crop year can now select from any of the types of pulse crops. And as we talked about before, that includes categories. So chickpeas, dry beans, dry peas, etc. One additional note, if dry beans is being analyzed, dry beans also requires a variety. For example, Great Northern beans, lima beans, or pinto beans. This is only required for dried beans though. Now, looking at how imbalance appears in the platform, this is really a project administrator or project level feature. So it's enabled by project administrators in the interface when they manage their projects. They have a setting in there to enable it. And when they do, then farmers who are in that project will see the additional inputs required to generate the full imbalance output. And looking at what those additions are, there are really 4 total. 3 of them relate to cover crops. For example, what was the dominant cover crop type? What was was the cover crop incorporated in the soil with a tillage operation? It's a yes or no question. And what was the approximate top growth of the cover crop? For example, 6 to 12 inches. The 4th input, asking whether stover has been baled, is only applicable if corn is being analyzed. Of course, stover being things like stalks, leaves, and cobs left on the field and baled after harvest. So it's really minimum inputs now that are required, given all the other inputs that are already gathered as part of the normal metric calculations. And then finally, project administrators can download what we call a comprehensive data output file with all the data from the farmers. You heard a little bit about aggregating that data at sort of a project level, so they can output that data from their project administration screens and then download that data for analysis and reporting to generate the kind of graphs that we just heard from through Alison and Simone. Also in 4.2, we had some additions, including a new dashboard for farmers. The dashboard is intended to provide quick announcement to routine things, like announcements, release notes, both past and upcoming releases, listing of events, and support resources like our support portal for farmers. The dashboard also includes an operations insight page that we're beginning to build and iterate on. It offers a summary of information for a farmer, the number of fields they have, number of acres, number of crop years or seasons, the total crops they've added under their account, whether they're enrolled in a Fieldprint project, and some graphs such as the number of acres per crop per year. And finally, we have another feature that's been added. We often get asked by project administrators, so there's an easier way to enroll a large number of growers. So we do have a bulk enrollment tool now added. It allows project administrators to upload multiple farmers at once, automatically validate their accounts, automatically opt them into the project, and configure their permissions for delegate access or sharing. The features, of course, require that the administrators get explicit permissions from the growers to add them into the project. And that enrollment feature also includes a template, so it makes it really easy to include those farmers in that spreadsheet and upload it, set those configurations, and add them to the system. And that concludes our overview of those new features and some of the additions. And so we now welcome taking questions on any of the topics, and our speakers are also going to be available here to take your questions.
Hi, Paul. We had a couple of questions come in. One was for Simone and Alison. Can you tell us a bit about the collaboration with the Farmers Business Network and how the growers are reacting to the imbalance model?
Yeah, absolutely. So the pilot kicked off in 2021 and had some really incredible excitement. It was actually there was a wait list for the enrollment by the end of the season. So pilot year 1 was really successful, and we're actually in year 2 now. It had similar levels of excitement, and the farmers seem to be really excited about that paired financial incentive in the form of the interest rate loan reduction. Yeah, it's been awesome.
It's fantastic. And one more question for Simone and Alison. Can you tell us a bit more about how cover crops, I know you sort of talked about it, but can you just go into a little bit more detail about how cover crops affect imbalance scores? Like, is there a difference between leguminous and cereal crops?
Yes, so cover crops like cereals that aren't harvested will really have little to no impact on the nitrogen balance score in terms of calculating, because we're not adding extra nitrogen to that cover crop, nor are we harvesting nitrogen from the field in that cover crop. However, for a cover crop like rye, it will, because rye will help capture extra nitrogen and keep it in the system. Oftentimes people find that they can then apply less nitrogen to subsequent crops, especially after using cover crop has been something that they're doing for a longer period of time. And so then in that way, by tightening up the nitrogen cycle, a cover crop can help somebody reduce their total nitrogen balance by either allowing them to reduce the total fertilizer nitrogen applied or improving their yield of their main crop, which means they remove more nitrogen from the field in that main crop. Cover crops that are legumes that fix nitrogen and add that to the system, that will mean we are adding nitrogen from legumes as well as from fertilizer or manure. And so that's why we ask the questions about how much growth you get in a cover crop, especially for a legume cover crop, because that can be used to help estimate how much additional nitrogen gets added to the system in that legume crop.
It's fascinating. Thank you so much. Another one for you, Alison, that just came through. Is N-Balance available for cotton?
Well, I don't know if it's available for cotton in the field to market platform. That would be a question for Paul, but we are using it for cotton in our work in India with farmers in India. And we've got 2 years of data collected from about 3,000 cotton farmers in India. And so we're seeing some really good responses to people realizing that they can improve their nitrogen management for cotton in that context. So hopefully we'll see the same thing going on in the US.
It's a great clarification. And the platform is configured for corn, soybeans, and wheat at this time.
Okay, so maybe we'll see this in the future. We have a question for Robert. Some curious, how are your customers responding to sustainability? Is this something that you hear them asking for? Do they want to know about the sustainability of beans in the United States?
They do. A lot of the major platforms, be it Walmart, Kroger, Costco, the major retailers are investing in sustainability, not only in their stores. It can be as simple as trading out, the incandescent lights for LED lights, but trying to go all the way back into their supply chains. I believe in the future, sustainability initiatives will be a key that unlocks doors in the retail environment. If it already isn't, I definitely believe it will be.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. And Tami, one for you. Are you finding with all this interest that's been in plant proteins, or a really growing interest in accessing that, are you finding that bean and other pulse crop acreage is expanding, or what's going on right now with the acreage?
Mm-hmm. I think that the acreage expansion that we're seeing, yes, I believe it's partially the result of that, partially the result of world supply and demand, prices that farmers are receiving. But I think also partially the cost of inputs. Farm inputs are increasing, as everyone knows, and pulses are a lower input crop. But our organization is continually working to increase domestic consumption, to get the word out about how nutritious and how good pulses are for us. So we hope to continue to expand.
That's fantastic. It's really exciting news. I'm not seeing any other. Oh, I think we may have another one just come through. We've heard that a lack of crop insurance programs in some states limit the expansion of acres devoted to pulses. What does it take to get crop insurance into new states? Any thoughts?
Yeah, there has to be first of all the grower interest in obtaining the crop insurance, and then it requires data collection. And so that usually takes multiple years to collect enough data. And if someone is interested, please reach out to me and we can talk about their area and how we can work to get crop insurance in their region.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Not seeing any more questions come in. So Paul will turn it.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you, Alison, Simone, Robert, and Tami, for all your input on pulses and N-Balance and corporate perspectives. So thank you to everyone for attending this webinar. Again, look out for the recording posted on Field to Market. And thank you for attending. This concludes our webinar.